On the night of 1st of July 2002, a passenger jet collided in midair with a cargo jet over Überlingen, a southern German town. All 71 occupants of the two planes were killed. A year and a half after the crash, a man was murdered at his house in Switzerland. Apparently, there was a connection between the two events, but how? Bashkirian Airlines Flight 2937 was operated by a Tupolev Tu-154M. It was a chartered flight carrying 60 passengers and 9 crew. 45 of the passengers were Russian schoolchildren who were on a school trip organized by the local UNESCO committee. Meanwhile, DHL Flight 611 was operated by a Boeing 757 with 2 flight crew on board. The aircraft was en route from Italy to Belgium while Flight 2937 was flying from Moscow to Barcelona. At around 9:30 p.m., both aircraft were flying at 36,000 feet over the town of Überlingen, near the Germany-Switzerland border. Even though the airspace is in Germany, the air traffic control was handled from Zurich, Switzerland by Skyguide, a private Swiss company. There were 2 air traffic controllers or ATCs on duty, but one of them was resting for the night. This was against Skyguide's regulations but had been a common practice for years and was known and tolerated by management. Because of that, the only ATC available was this man, Peter Nielsen. He had the added workload of managing 2 workstations at the same time. Plus, the main radar image processing system was under maintenance and controllers had to use a fallback system. This was unknown to Nielsen. These factors contributed to Nielsen to only realize about the impending collision literally at the very last minute. 44 seconds prior to the collision, Nielsen told Flight 2937 to descend to 35,000 feet to avoid collision with Flight 611. Meanwhile, the Traffic Collision Avoidance Systems or TCAS on board the Russian plane instructed them to climb. At about the same time, the TCAS on Flight 611 instructed the pilots of the aircraft to descend. Had both aircraft followed these instructions, the collision would have been avoided. This, however, wasn't the case. The Boeing jet's pilots complied and started the descent. Unfortunately, they could not immediately inform Nielsen of their action because the ATC was busy talking to Flight 2937. The Tupolev, however, decided to ignore the TCAS and followed Nielsen's instructions. So now, both flights were descending and again headed for a collision. Seconds before the accident, the pilots of Flight 2937 finally obeyed the TCAS after realizing the incoming Boeing and started to climb, but it was too late. At 11:35 local time, the aircraft glided at an altitude of about 35,000 feet. The Tupolev broke into several pieces, scattering wreckage over a wide area. The crippled Boeing struggled for a further 7 kilometers before crashing into a wooded area. In the aftermath, Nielsen suffered a traumatic stress and had been given medical treatment. Skyguide initially put the blame on the Russian pilots of Flight 2937 but eventually accepted full responsibility. In September 2007, the court found 4 Skyguide's managers guilty of manslaughter and sentenced 3 of them to suspended prison terms. The 4th was ordered to pay a fine. The accident raised questions as to how pilots must react when they receive conflicting orders from TCAS and from the ATC. The operations manual did not clearly state that TCAS should always take precedence over any ATC commands. Since then, changes have been made so that is the case. This is Vitaly Kaloyev. He wasn't on any of the 2 planes, but his wife and 2 children were. He was waiting for them at Barcelona airport when he learned of the crash. He was one of the first relatives to arrive at the crash scene and discovered the body of his daughter himself 3 kilometers from where the accident happened. After the tragedy, he stopped working, refused to shave, and constantly wore black. He even turned his home into a shrine dedicated to his dead family. Driven by that grief, Kaloyev tracked down and stabbed Nielsen to death at his home. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison but was released just 3 years later after appealing that his mental condition has not been sufficiently considered in the initial sentence. Upon returning to Russia, he was celebrated as a hero. In January 2008, he was appointed Deputy Construction Minister of North Ossetia. In 2016, he was awarded the highest state medal by the government. His story inspired the movie Aftermath, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger as a character largely based on Kalayev. Today, he still lives in North Ossetia with his new wife and their twins.
But this was not revenge. This was punishment.
Это не месть была, это, скорее всего, кара была.